So let's have just a few shows of hands. How many of you write Apex code? About 50% maybe? And how many of you are on Lightning most of the time or all the time? And how many of you are still on Classic most of the time or all the time? Okay. Has anyone here written some Lightning web components yet? We got any Lightning web component developers in here? Cool. Excellent. Great. We about ready to start? All right. Let's get started then. So, thank you for coming. Advanced Flow. I'm Alex Edelstein. I'm Senior Director of Product Management on the Flow team. I get paid to add features to Flow all day long, which is the best job. And you are at the most popular session. This had more bookmarks by far than any other session. Now, you will say that is because of my expansive personal charisma, but I am here to tell you that that is not the full story. The rest of that story involves the power of Flow, its expansive capability in spanning the whole gamut, in incorporating that pro code capability, mixing it with declarative possibilities, and producing the most effective way to build Salesforce applications and add value to your Salesforce environment. Now, not all of you are actually intermediate or advanced, probably. Since this is an intermediate and advanced session, I wanted to make sure that all of you can make it. So if you don't feel that you are particularly experienced, feel free to use one of the following phrases with your neighbor. I miss the old days when if your flow hit SQL limits, you just banged the monitor a few times. Boy, that multi-select, am I right or am I right? And I don't know about you, but I miss those sweet, sweet flash-loading coffee breaks. So, forward-looking statement, please make your purchase decisions based only on publicly available product. I'm going to show you stuff I shouldn't be showing you, stuff I haven't been cleared to show you, and that's just the way some of us roll. So since you are advanced, you do not need to be told that you can unleash productivity with Flow, nor do you need to have it pointed out to you that it allows you to design in a point-and-click fashion. You are already fully aware that you can use it as a very effective tool for integrating with a wide variety of Salesforce and non-Salesforce systems, and you know that it is also extremely effective for visual workflows and guided engagement. You also know that there are 4 great ways that you can connect via Flow to the outside world. You can use platform events, you can use external services to ingest entire APIs, and as I'm about to show you, you can grab data from MuleSoft API and other web service endpoints and do cool things with them. So you probably are noticing that I'm talking very quickly. We realized relatively recently that the real audience for a lot of this are the people who are going to watch it on video afterwards, and they, of course, can slow things down and go back. You poor bastards are just going to have to follow along as best you can. So the first thing I want to go talk to you about, brand new summer feature, what we call support for rich web objects. This was a tough one to name because what is a rich web object? Well, these are examples. Basically, these are responses that you get from making an API call. On the left, one to DocuSign. On the right, one to QuickBooks. I just picked them pretty much at random, but they have characteristics that are very common of the kind of data that's out there that is accessible to you if you can figure out a way to get it into your Salesforce environment. JSON, nested data structures, arrays inside of arrays. So we wanted to make it easier to get that data into Salesforce and manipulate it declaratively. Traditionally, you have to get your Apex out, start writing some code, start doing some parsing. Let me show you how you can do it in Summer 19. In this use case, I have a API, and this is an actual API that I set up on MuleSoft, and I've got it right here, and you can see that if I go and hit it, then it brings back this product data. Now, this is a very typical kind of product data. It's a little messy. It actually has 3 different sizes and 3 different SKUs, all packed into one sort of composite product. And that's convenient for an API. What we want to do here is we want to create 3 product records in Salesforce so that we can work with that data. So, oh, I'm going backwards. Wrong button. Okay, so we're going to create 3 records in Salesforce so we can do it. And this is the flow that I'm going to use. There's no visual element to it, so it's going to happen very quickly. I'm going to walk you through this. I'm going to quickly get the JSON data from the web, hit that API call, and then I'm going to extract some of the nested arrays that are inside that JSON so that I can work with them in Flow. Then I'm going to loop over all that data to assemble some product records. And finally, I'm going to do one single database transaction to commit it all. And so let me go show you. So here we have here's my products, and here is my flow. So let's just run that. So it's going to go out, it's going to hit that same endpoint, we're done. We go back to my products, I refresh, and you can see that here are my 3 products. So they were all created, the links have been put in the proper place. So what's happening there? How did we do that and make it so that it was something that we could just do in Flow? Well, the first thing, there's a sort of one-time setup that I'm doing here to make Flow aware of this JSON. So I took this JSON, I took this API endpoint, and I ran it through a website called JSON to Apex. And the goal here is to create a sort of template. We're not actually going to write any code, but we're going to create Apex classes that map to that particular rich web object. And so this is something you can do with a simple paste and click. And I took the resulting classes that map to that JSON, and I put them in my org. So I just created Apex classes in my org, and then I added these Aura-enabled annotations, which are the critical way that Apex tells Flow, okay, you can use this, you can have access to this. So what do you get if you do all that work? Well, you do have to do that work to set it up. What happens is inside of Flow, you get access to a new kind of resource called an Apex defined variable. And so if I go back here and we take a look, you can see that I've got some Apex defined variables containing individual objects. I've got some Apex defined collection variables. And if I go here and select this, you can see that I have access in Flow to all of the Apex classes I've chosen to expose. And that allows me to do things like drill in. So here, I'm actually drilling in using point and click to grab the identifiers. We're working on fixing this little thing, by the way. Something in the base component. So I grab this, I loop over that resulting information. Identifiers, you will recall, this is what we know of identifiers. It's sort of buried in this rich web object. So you can now expose all of this information, work with it effectively inside of Flow. Let's talk a little about another element of that particular flow. You saw me doing some looping there. I wanted to talk a little more about looping. It's one of the features that really, once you get comfortable with it, lets you supercharge what you can do with Flow. And it's the key to understanding looping starts with understanding 3 different data structures that you can kind of keep them in your head at the same time. The first is the starting collection of data. A loop works by processing a list of things one at a time, and list processing kind of fundamental to computers. So you're always going to start with that collection of records or of strings. The second key data structure is the placeholder variable that stores whatever member of that list you currently happen to be looping through. So flow's just going to crank through that list, and every time it goes through, it's going to grab one of the members of that list and store it in what we call this loop variable. The third data structure is not essential, but I find myself using it almost all of the time I do looping. And that is, I create a second record collection variable to store all of the changed stuff that my loop is changing before I finally update the database. One of the things people run into with loops sometimes is to say, built this powerful flow, it's got this great loop, but it did so much computational stuff, Salesforce started hitting me with limit warnings and alerts and errors. And one of the ways that you can address that is by trying to do as little database work inside the flow, the loop as possible, and save that up in a record collection variable using an assignment and do it afterwards. And if we go back here, you can see that that's kind of what I'm doing right here. I'm taking the piece of work that I've been working on this trip through the loop. I'm using one of these collection operators, super powerful, and I'm adding it one at a time to this variable. And I actually don't even save a record until I've gone through 2 complete loops. And so that's one of the tools you can use. Another powerful tool is to create Apex actions and use those inside the loop, but unfortunately, I don't think I have time to talk about those today. One best practice that I thought I'd mention in passing is just to sprinkle these into the presentation. Use your names of your variables to give you useful information. You're never going to have this as clear in your mind as you have it right now. When you come back to maintain this, or God forbid somebody else tries to maintain this flow you're working on, it's useful to have information. In this example, you can see that I'm using a plural, a clear plural for all of my record collection variables, and I'm using a clear singular for my individual record variable. Some of you are probably going, well, duh, but this is something that when I look at a lot of flows, I don't see consistency and I don't see patterns like this that can be very helpful when you're coming back to maintain this kind of stuff. Let's talk about choices. So choices are sort of they're the wheelhouse of flow. A huge amount gets done with choices. We made choices very powerful. We didn't make them the easiest thing in the world to use. We're working on solving that problem with simplification efforts. In the meantime, here are some tips to help you make sense of all of the different choices. The single concept that I find most useful to keeping everything straight in the world of choices is to think of every actual question that you're asking a user to fill out as a sort of symbiotic partnership between a front-end screen component and a back-end data source. We don't use the word data source, but that's really what you're plugging in to your screen component. So you've got these 4 different ways right now that you can create that screen component to contain choice data, and then you've got these different back-end data sources that allow you to plug in. And you can mix and match them, but you have to keep them straight. And this is the flow of the data that will help you stay out of trouble when you're trying to figure out which value do I want to reference when I'm downstream of that choice and I just want to get that choice value and use it. So the data from upstream is going to flow into your data sources. Then your data source feeds into the screen, whatever you're exposing to the user. The user clicks on something, and that piece of information that you want to capture from what the user clicked on, you're going to reference that screen component. You're not going to reference all of those back-end data sets. They just feed the screen. What you're going to want is what the user picked, and that comes from the screen component itself. Let's look at a few examples. The easiest, probably the easiest way to create choices is to use picklist fields. Really convenient. Let the picklist field do the work for you. That's a standard field you can add to any object. You can see that I've created a simple one here with string values. And then in the manager, I create a picklist choice set. And that is right there. And then you can take the picklist field and so you create the set, and as you can see here, Flow will actually give you a choice. Once you pick your object, we'll show you all of the pick lists that are available. You pick the right one, and then in the screen builder, you link that picklist choice set, that back-end data source, to whatever UI you want to show the user. So you can pull in a radio button group, you can pull in a pick list, and you can feed that set of choices. Another pair to feature radio buttons and record choice set. Record choice set's probably the most powerful of the different ways that you can create choices because it lets you work with records. And so often what you're trying to do is you're trying to grab some subset, some filtered group of records and get the user to pick one. So in this case, I've got some ship objects, and let's say that we want the user in the flow to pick a ship. And they want to pick, you want them only to pick a ship that has an enhancement, a requested enhancement of sales. So you need to filter this list down. Now, you can do that with a record choice set. So just like you do a get records query, a record choice set allows you to build an expression. In this case, down at the bottom here, I'm saying, give me all the ships where enhancement equals sales. That's going to provide you a dynamic, it's going to be responsive right. It's going to do that query right when the flow runs, and it's going to provide that data. Now, with records, there's a little more richness, and that means there's a little more you have to think about when you're configuring them, because sometimes the data that you actually want to use from that selected record isn't the same as the data that you used in the filter. So in this example, there's actually 3 pieces of data that I want to use. I wanted to use the enhancement field to come up with that initial filter. But then when I'm actually showing the radio button group to the user, I want to use the name. That's a different field from enhancement. And then when I'm downstream in the flow and I want to use this selection and do something with it, I want to use the ID. So there's 3 different fields that we're kind of trying to let Flow know we care about. And so far, the only thing we've done is we've done enhancements. So there's this extra section in record choice set, and if you lose context, it can be a bit of a head scratcher. What choice label? What is choice label? But basically, all this is it's letting you tell Flow the second and the third of those 3 fields. The label is what in that record do I want the user to see when they're making their choice, and the value is, after the choice is completely done, what do I want to pass downstream? Okay, so I'm going to go skip over that one in the name of time. Quick comment on manual choices. Don't really have time to do an example of this. I use manual choices a lot. They take a lot of work because you have to individually craft each choice, but they can be very useful, particularly when you just need some quick ad hoc choices, and you don't really want to create a record query or a pick list field. The same general idea. Choices are back-end data that feed screens, and if you keep that in mind, then that is really what you need to know. A quick comment on Multiselect Picklist. The joke about Multiselect Picklist is that it's great, except that it gives you this string that's got semicolons in it, and that is pretty hard to work with unless you go into code. And there have been some heroic efforts that you can find on the web to use formulas and stuff, but the good news is that starting today, you can actually install a dual list box and have essentially multi-selection that includes the user can order it, and this list box flow screen component returns a collection of strings. So you're going to get a collection of strings that you can then loop over or do something with. That's not the end. There are still things we need to do to make picking, selecting stuff in Flow easier, but it's a start. And this is an example of a community-built screen component. This was actually built mostly by 7 Summits, which was collaborating with us on a very cool project I'm going to show you in a little bit. Quick update on Lookup. Lookup components, not native yet. There is a very powerful Lookup component in Flow, and you can see it can do things like where clauses that are very effective. It's a community component, open source. We've been getting some great pull requests. Eric Smith's been doing a fabulous job maintaining it. But I did want to give you a teaser of what's coming in Winter 20. So what you see up on the screen here is the official lookup that's coming to Flow. And it's going to include goodies like type-ahead search and fully polymorphic lookup capabilities and most recently used lists. So we are leveraging some of the cool awesomeness that the base component guys have done, and that's on its way in several months. Another that's on its way in October is Lightning Web Components based screen components. So you are going to very soon be able to build screen components using the new LWC, which is a great advance. We learned a lot from Aura components. LWC components move the state-of-the-art forward in a lot of ways. Of course, we're going to keep supporting Aura components forever. That dual list box was just built in Aura. But here you see one of the first ever Lightning Web components. It's a composite of a search list box, and it pops up a data table, and it's using the Lightning Flow Screen target. So that's on its way as well. And just to round out the sort of choices solutions, there are some wonderful things on App Exchange. So you can go to the Flow solutions of App Exchange, and among the many, many awesome things there, like templates that you'll be hearing more about at TDX from my colleague Jason Teller, you are able to install some, I'm still saying download in 2019. You are still going to be able to, you can install things like Swipey and Flow Magic, which let you do some amazing things. So a great way to add a lot of power to your flows and look like a real wizard is to take advantage of some of these pre-built components. Okay, let's go from, so far we've been talking about some of the nuts and bolts. I want to take it up to 10,000 feet and show you some higher level stuff. In particular, I want to show you our latest sample application that's built on top of Flow. And this is part of a growing amount of energy that's going on at every level that's taking advantage of Flow as an application development environment. What does that mean? That means things like using multiple flows together, using flows with custom objects and triggers to solve a richer business process. So if you've seen our guided engagement story and the guided action list, you know that we have been doing a lot of work at Salesforce to try and make flows more useful in case management. We wanted to take that a step farther. So this is a use case of a more adaptive case management solution. So suppose that you want to associate some flows with each state of a case. And suppose that you want to have, so whatever state the case happens to be at, you want to feature and surface just the set of processes that your users or customers need. And suppose that you want to make some of those required. And suppose that you want to make some of them dependent on others. There's a certain order. Maybe you can't start the collection of the professional history until first you collect the personal information. And suppose you want to have a case plan that everyone can use automatically each time you create a case, but you also want to leave the door open for certain scenarios where it's not all cut and dried, and sometimes someone might go, oh, you know what, we're going to need an extra field investigation on that one. So you want to let people ad hoc add a process to a particular case state. So let's take a look at this. This is a completed application that we're about to put into open source so everyone can use it. And let's go take a look at it right here. So I'm in an app, I've installed this package, and let's go and create a case. And you can see that it's got this lightning component here. Now, if I try, the case is in collect resume state. If I try and click on transition case, it gives me an error message. Now, what it actually did there is it ran a flow. It ran one of 5 different flows that are part of this application. So it's saying, no, you're going to have to collect some personal information first. And so here we are running another flow. Now, I can enter some information. And when I finish this, what it's actually doing is it's tracking that that flow got completed, coming back, updating the custom object that's tracking this. And so the person managing the case can now see that that particular part of the process is done. And now I've done the required part, and I can, if I want to, transition the case. Now the case is transitioned. I'm in recruiter review. I've got a different set of processes I can follow. If I want to add a step, I can do that. Notice here, I've got a list of my active flows. That's a new flow screen component that I'll mention a little later. Takes advantage of some summer stuff. So what's actually going on here? I mentioned that this involves a bunch of different flows. And so this is the system. Here's the system diagram. On the left are 2 flows that are actually doing the management. I didn't actually even show you the management, so let me show you that. If we go over here to case management, you can see that all of the UI for doing this is done with flows. So new case plan, and I can choose what record type it is. And here's the genesis of the, boy, it would sure be nice if we had a dual list box. I'm dropping into a subflow here to create some separation of concerns and using a flow here that focuses on steps. And here's where I specify things like predecessors and requirements. So this is all available in these management flows, and because they're flows, that means that you can change them. You can update them. You can make field modifications to them. We'll also make these available as templates, which allows you to clone them and use them, but still get the benefit of push upgrades. And you'll hear more about that in our template sessions. So there's a trigger that's firing when cases are created, and what that basically does is it creates a set of what we call case steps in the background, and that's really tracking. That's where we're tracking all of the status throughout that case plan. And then when that lightning component is clicked on, what is it doing? It's launching flows. What are some of the advantages of that? Well, lightning components are great, but they are very code heavy. If you combine the UI awesomeness of a lightning component with flows to handle some of the mundane tasks, you get a very nice ability to spread out the work, make certain parts more maintainable, allow customization without having to touch your code, and so on and so forth. So keep an eye out on that. We'll be publishing that to the unofficial SF site, so you can go and take a look at it and customize it and see how you can build a richer flow application out of constituent flows. Now, the flow picker that you saw in there takes advantage of a new summer feature that I just wanted to mention because it's an easy one to miss. There are 3 new S objects that have been quietly added. I am doing a simple Apex SOQL query to get a list of all active flows in my organization. Between these 3 new S objects, you can get a huge amount of detail about the flows that are currently defined in your organization. This is a pretty advanced feature. It's a little exotic. We think it's going to be very useful for tooling. And in fact, I will personally be giving a big prize to the best tool that somebody comes up with between now and Dreamforce that uses one of these 3 S objects. So let's see, flow actions. I didn't have much time in this session to really go into. I love talking about actions. Maybe I might have a few minutes to build one here. But basically, some of the things you're going to see here, the action dialog is adding categorization. And one of the reasons we did that is because there is a lot of growth in the use of actions. Now, This is, in my opinion, the single most underappreciated feature in Flow. And that is the ability to take an Apex class, essentially, and with a few tiny changes to the Apex class, turn it into a declarative building block that shows up in flows. And that is tremendously leveraged. Even if you are the best coder in the world, wouldn't it not be great for you to be able to take your Apex classes, make them field administratable, and then package them up like this so that other people who are good at building flows but can't write code as well as you can actually drag those classes, those actions, into their flows and do different things with them. So it is a tremendous, we really think that the future involves these sort of synergistic trade relationships between the people writing the code and the people who can take that in building blocks and do great declarative things with it. So that's coming along. Another cool thing we're doing, if you work with actions, what you might be thinking is, I love this action potential, but they're just so hard to configure sometimes because you can't customize the UI of your action in Flow. And the good news is we have something we're working on called custom property editors. And that is going to allow all actions to package with themselves essentially a custom property editor that will make it really easy to provide elegant UI to go along with all of these actions. I mentioned flow templates a couple times. We've got a session coming up tomorrow on that. That's really nice. What you see here in the upper right is what we call the new flow modal, what happens when you click the new flow button. And a template, you can take any flow, click the template checkbox, and it will show up here as a template that can be started, cloned, and modified by anybody who in the organization without the original flow being affected. And if you're an ISV, if you're a strategic integrator, this is great because you can give the organization the opportunity. You can package these up. You can put them in managed packages. You can push changes to them, but still give your customers the ability to customize them in the field. And so then that's pretty awesome. Okay, now I did have a special bonus teaser here involving conditional field visibility, but I assume that none of you are interested in seeing that, so I'm just going to skip over it. Right? Nobody's interested in seeing conditional field visibility at all. So this is working on Winter 20 development machines. This is all live, real, and coming in October. And first we're going to bring conditional field visibility, and then we're going to bring conditional field requiredness, and then we're going to build all sorts of crazy exotic conditionality, and it's going to be really great. So thanks for your patience on that. So that's some of the key material that I wanted to share with you today. Remember, as far as learning goes, you've got all the trailheads have been revised and updated. There is, in addition to the developer page, the unofficial site is full of great things, and frankly, there is just a real flowering of stuff out there. Like, I found this weekend when I was just prepping for this session. Somebody, I have no idea who this is, somebody has gone out and published like 10 5-minute flow tutorials using the new flow builder. I think that's pretty awesome. So we're trying to collect all of this so that if you go to unofficial SF, you can find links to all of this kind of great material. MVPs have been, continue to do excellent, stellar work blogging about flow. So there is a lot of support out there. And of course, the Trailblazer community. I am continually amazed at how much great, fast support is provided by the Flow HANA on the Trailblazer Salesforce automation community. So here's a slide of what's coming next. We're going to do this again at 8:30 tomorrow, but there's another Flow Builder session that's about to start, and then there's some advanced Flow template stuff happening at 11:30 tomorrow, and the general introduction to Flow templates at 1 p.m. as well. Flow is being demonstrated at one of the stations out downstairs, and you can go and see the demo there and ask questions. So I actually have a little extra time. That's great. I cut so much out. Let's see what we have to show. So the topic that I wanted to go into a little was to provide a little color on how you create an Apex action and how you can take advantage of that. And so I wanted to show you, if we go back to my Get Products MuleSoft example, that started with an Apex action. And it's actually a very Apex action because this Get Products, if you'll recall, is just returning JSON. All the rest of the work was done in Flow. Usually, the Apex actions do a little more work because you haven't had this ability. But I wanted to show you a little of the detail that I was afraid I wouldn't have time on. In this Apex action, you can see this invocable method annotation. This is the key thing that causes an Apex class to show up in Flow Builder as a building block. So simply by adding this, it shows up. And where does it show up? It shows up right here. I drag this action in, and I am going to be able to see here, and you can see that I have all of these different actions on this org. I truly have all sorts of powerful things like getting I've got a random number generator here. I've got some advanced SQL queries. There's 10 or 11 different quip actions. So all of these actions show up. Now, when these show up, one of the things that Flow does is it exposes the inputs and the outputs, because an Apex class is going to have input parameters and it's going to have return values. So that is the most sophisticated, the part that's kind of the most sophisticated, essentially, is putting that all together. So you can see here that there's a couple fields here that are exposed to Flow. Well, where do those come from? Well, they come from this invocable variable. So here, this particular class has a single input. I've got a single property here, and I've put the invocable variable annotation on it, and that's going to show up in Flow as one of the inputs. And what I've done here is I've done another thing here. I've put it into a little class called requests, and this is just a little pattern that you can see in our help material that makes it easy to put several of these properties into the invocable action. Because some people look at invocable action, they say, wait a second, I think I can only do one variable. This is how you can do many variables. And then here, these are the outputs that get spit back. So some of the things that you can do here, one very powerful thing is if you've got a SQL query that you know how to do, but Flow just doesn't allow you to do quite that much complexity in SQL, put it in an Apex class, and then just throw this invocable method on it. Suddenly, you've got an Apex action that you pull into your Flow that does that SQL query and returns exactly the data structure you want. So you can have, if you have that SQL query and it's calling and it's getting a list of accounts, you can have it returning that list of accounts and work with it in Flow. And that allows you to take some of the most performance-intensive parts of your Flow and do them in Apex, which is great if you're running up against limit constraints. So that's pretty much all the time we've got. Thank you very much. Remember to give me a 5 on your feedback. Stellar is spelled with 2 L's. And thank you for coming. Please, may your flows all work smoothly.